This morning, we're going to continue our conversation about love. You'd think that we'd be experts when it comes to the subject of love as professing Christians. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, you're not a follower of Christ, good news, you're going to hear probably something along the lines of what you wish Christians knew and believed when it came to love. If you take all of the criticism in the world that is pointed at Christianity, there will certainly be some criticisms that we would understand just kind of come with the territory. But unfortunately, I think that a large percentage of the criticism that the world would have for the church is this view or bias that Christians don't love very well. And how unfortunate is that when it's exactly the very thing that we ought to be known for, that ought to set us apart and differentiate us, is actually the way in which we express real, genuine love. And so why is it that we've apparently given so many an occasion to think otherwise? Well, last week we talked about the priority of love. Today we're going to get into some of the way that Paul describes love. So if you have your Bibles, it's going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I just want to read verses 4 through 7. Again, for many of you, this is a familiar passage of Scripture because you've read it, perhaps even studied it on your own. Perhaps you've been at a wedding where there was a reading at some point of 1 Corinthians 13, extolling the virtues of love. But Paul had a reason for writing this. So he talked somewhat about that reason last week. And again, this morning, we want to get into some of the nitty-gritty of how Paul describes this thing called love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 4, love is patient, love is kind. Two ways that Paul speaks positively about love. Here's what love is, right? It is patient, it is kind. And then he gives us a list of ways that love does not express itself. These are what we might describe as negations of love. Love does not envy. Love is not boastful. Love is not arrogant. Love is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. And then again, Paul comes back to, here's what love does. Love, it bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, endures all things. I'd like for those of you who were here last week to remember that love isn't just some abstract quality used to describe a feeling that we may have, right? That love, in the biblical sense, is not predominantly concerned with the way we feel, but it's concerned with what we do and how we do, how we are. Love is something that acts. So let's look at these one by one. First of all, Paul says love is patient. Love is patient. Now, I've tried to re-describe in hopefully some familiar ways that we might be able to kind of remember. Not that as we go through this, you're going to find that there's probably way more than we can actually ingest. But perhaps there's something that may speak very pointedly to you in kind of exposing an area where you might see God work out this thing called love in you in a real way. So Paul says love is patient. In other words, I'd say love can passively wait for an unreasonably long time. Like when we think about what does it mean that love is patient and love is kind, Paul uses these two descriptions about love. And this first one, I think, has a sort of passive sense to it, whereas the second, which we'll get into in just a moment, is a little more active, right? Love is patient. It can wait for a unreasonably long time. How many of you are good at waiting? How many of you are good at waiting as long as you know there's a reasonable expectation for how long you'll be able to wait, right? Like if you're actually able to define the parameters of the wait, for a lot of us, it's no big deal. But patience is interesting in that it permits us to wait for what we might describe as an unreasonable amount of time. And this is like, up until then, it's not really patience, right? I mean, if the time that we have to wait for something is reasonable, that's not being patient. If you go to McDonald's and it takes them 90 seconds to bring out your burger and fries, right? Did you wait? You waited. Right? Did you wait quietly? Sure. Did you exercise patience? Probably not, right? I don't know, 90 seconds seems like a pretty reasonable amount of time for somebody to hand you your dinner, right? But patience begins where unreasonableness begins, and this is where it's hard. How many of you love the new lights out here on 38 Westview Drive, or Westview Drive here? That's right, none of you that are coming from that direction, right? 2 weeks ago, I mean, I'm usually on the road before a lot of people are awake, right? And I used to come and the light was green and I just took a left-hand turn. Every once in a while, there might be a car coming. Every once in a while. I have to wait a couple seconds. Now there's a red light. And the world is quiet and dead. And you know how long it takes for that light to change? Literally forever. Right? I barely made it here this morning. Can somebody testify? Right? It's obnoxious. I live in Sanford. There's 2 traffic lights that I have to deal with. They both are terrible. They both do the same thing, right? It's unreasonable, right? That's the problem, right? If I pull up, light cycle changes, the light turns green, that's fine, right? But there's this point of unreasonableness, and you take that into our relationships. Has anybody got anybody unreasonable in their life? Like, just they require an unreasonable amount of patience, right? But that's exactly what patience is. When I memorized this chapter as a child, of course, we were using the King James Version, right? So some of you will remember the beautiful poetry of the King James where it says, "Charity suffereth long." Right? That's what it is, isn't it? I wonder sometimes, why do we change? I mean, that's beautiful. Suffereth? Oh, I suffereth. Yes. I suffereth long, right? Long. You've heard the expression, suffer not a fool, right? That is, you don't put up with somebody who's a fool. Or I don't suffer fools. I'm not gonna tolerate, foolishness, foolish people, that kind of thing. I'm done with that. And that's charity suffereth long, right? It for an unreasonable amount of time, it puts up with what it's asked to put up with. When it comes to the matter of our relationships, I think it's interesting to bring in 1 Thessalonians, another letter that Paul wrote, chapter 5, verse 14, where Paul uses this idea of patience being exercised within the church community. He says this, he says, "And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all." Let me read that again. Admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. All three of these ways that Paul classifies people. And I don't know if you caught this, but these are three particular groups of people that are especially hard to be patient with, right? The idle. We'd ask when it comes to the idle, well, what good are they? What good are they? You ever witnessed idleness? Idle kind of people, right? Well, what good are they? Paul says, be patient with them. Be patient with the idle. Admonish them, yes. Warn them, yes. Be patient with them. The faint-hearted. Some of you here are especially apt to just run away from faint-heartedness, right? You consider yourself strong and resilient, and whenever somebody else opposite you seems to demonstrate the opposite kinds of qualities, this sort of faint-heartedness is just, why are they so needy? Why are they so needy? Paul says, encourage the faint-hearted, but be patient with them. The weak, the weak are trouble, right? Because they're holding us back, right? Those of you who are go-getters, that are ambitious, that want to get things done. The weak, they hold us back, they slow us down, they're a drain on our resources. Paul says, be patient with them all. Love is patient. Secondly, love is kind. Love is kind. So where patience is this sort of passive expression of love in that it can wait for an unreasonably long time, love is kind. This is a more active sense in which love expresses itself. Love here acts generously for the benefit, especially of an undeserving person. Right? When we say love is kind, what we're saying here is that love expresses itself generously, but does so for the benefit of another person. And especially, if you want to find where real kindness exists, it is not occurring between two equal parties where each of those parties is capable of reciprocating the act of kindness. I do this for you, and you do that for me. There's a sense in which that's kindness, but that is not the kind of biblical, loving kindness that Paul is really getting at the heart of here. He's talking about a kindness that is expressed especially toward the exact person who doesn't deserve it, right? And so this is better than the thing that we're encouraged all the time to do today, which is to practice what? Random acts of kindness, right? This isn't random, though. This isn't about practicing random acts of kindness. This is the kind of kindness toward a person who doesn't deserve it. When you pay for the person behind you in the drive-through lane as a random act of kindness, right? Well, that person behind you hasn't done anything to you. So again, there's a sense in which, I'm not saying don't do that, especially if I'm the one behind you, but I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, just be careful, of patting yourself on the back a little too quickly, because you did something for a stranger. The kind of kindness here it's not concerned necessarily with randomness or even anonymity. It's actually a kindness that is expressed even in light of how undeserving the other person is. Now, I think it's important to point out that when it comes to the way that Paul describes love as being patient and kind here, that God, he sets this example for us, doesn't he? This is exactly the way we would describe the love that God has shown to us. It is a love that is both patient and kind. It's patient in the sense that that God doesn't just torch the earth, right? Right? What should God do? What ought God to do with this mess that we have made of the world and of our lives and all of that? Well, he should just blow it up. Right? That's what he should do. But he doesn't, because his love expresses itself in patience. He's patient with us. Not only that, but he's kind toward us. Again, I think, need to reflect on the incredible ways that God has demonstrated acts of kindness toward us. As you read through the Bible, you find God coming and intervening in the lives of people. He makes a covenant with a man that becomes a family, that becomes a nation. And God demonstrates acts of kindness toward that nation, acts of generosity toward an undeserving people, again and again and again and again, up until the point where God then, he steps up his game and he steps into the earth in the person of Jesus Christ and takes on human flesh. He becomes one of us and walks among us and demonstrates his kindness through his teaching. He demonstrates kindness through his healing ministry. He teaches kindness through the way he interacts with the people that come and go in and out of his life. He demonstrates kindness as he spreads his arm and surrenders himself to the cross. We continue to experience the works and the acts of God's kindness through the ongoing work of the Holy Spirit, right, that now lives in us and among us, that I'm a person filled with God's Spirit, and now I enjoy the benefit of an actively kind God. So love is patient, love is kind. Thirdly, love does not envy. Love does not envy. This may not be exactly what you think when you think of envy, but probably something similar. This word can be used both positively and negatively. In a positive sense, it means to wish something better for oneself, right? So the Greek word here that we translate as envy could, in a positive sense, simply describe the desire or the wish for something better for yourself, for myself. In a negative sense, like Paul uses it here, it means to wish something better for oneself to the detriment of another. And Paul says love doesn't do that. Love does not permit itself to seek the elevation or the benefit of oneself to the detriment of another. In other words, don't raise your hands, but have you ever felt this way? I wish I had that, and that person didn't. That's envy. That's the kind of envy Paul's talking about here. I wish I had that, and that person didn't. And so to not envy, right, to actually express real love would be to act positively in light of somebody else's gain. And how many of you know this is really hard to do? When somebody else is celebrating, when somebody else has got the thing, to actually, like, you think you do a good job just sort of being neutral about the whole thing. But love isn't neutral. Love acts, right? Love acts positively. And so what love does is it acts positively in light of someone else's gain. For example, if you happen to be in a situation where you and another person were up for, some job or some promotion, and the other person got the job, meaning you didn't, right? To envy would be, I wish I had that job and that person didn't. And so we think, well, all right, well, I'm going to try really hard not to go there. Certainly not going to say anything like that out loud. But how many of us would naturally be inclined to, okay, this other person gets the job, so we were sort of equals. Now this other person is above me, and so to some degree I'm may be accountable to them. I mean, you think especially in the kind of relationship where now that person becomes your boss, say, like, how hard is that? Like, I could have had that promotion. I could have, or I should have had that promotion, right? Like, the reality is every once in a while, the promotion goes to the wrong person. It should have been you. And so what do you do? Well, when you know that it could have been or it should have been you, there's going to be the natural tendency to act in a way that makes that person's job harder, right? It's like, okay, well, I didn't get the job, but I'll tell you what, I'm not going to make that person's job any easier, right? And so whether you do it consciously or subconsciously, we act in ways that either make their job harder, or at least we're not going to do anything to make their job easier. But instead, what love would require is that we be actively helpful and supportive. Can you imagine? Again, like living with the reality that that person got what you wanted, that person has what you wanted, for you and me to act in a way that helps, supports, and celebrates, even if we've been slighted somehow. That's love. I mean, that's crazy love, right? And so love, what I find interesting about love here is that love finds happiness in someone else's happiness. You know how hard it is a lot of times for us to find happiness in someone else's happiness. That can be a really, really difficult thing, especially if we happen to be, people that are not particularly happy. That we're living with some measure of discontent or disappointment or whatever. And so the thing that makes us feel better is the other person's misery or the other person's disappointment. That's not love. Love manages, despite one's own circumstances, to actually find happiness. It relishes in the happiness of another person's happiness. Next, love is not boastful. Love is not boastful. To be boastful would be to draw attention to yourself, or, if you're not so ridiculous and so out there that you're gonna because there are some people, it's just clear. Look how much this person needs to have the light shining on them all the time, right? And those people drive you and me crazy, right? We're glad none of those are in the room today, and so we can feel free and safe to talk about them. But no, there's those people, right? And you might be one of those, and if you are, cut it out. No. Right. There are certain personality traits or certain experiences that ingrain and form into a person this sort of need to be celebrated, to be the center of attention. And if it's not that open and obvious to everyone else, right? And here's where it's going to touch the rest of us. We want to give everybody every opportunity to think as highly of us as they possibly can, right? So it's like, okay, well, I don't need to be the center of attention, but I definitely need them to know how good I am, right? Or what I've done. Have you ever had somebody that it felt like they were heaping praise on you or heaping criticism on you? You probably remember more when people just heaped criticism on you, right? It's just like one critique after another just being heaped upon you over and over. It's like what Paul here describes in this word boastful, the idea of it is that a person is heaping praise on themselves, right? They're just kind of like piling on the praise after praise on themselves. Let me ask you, how much does it bother you when you don't get the credit you deserve? How many of you like a job well done or something like that, and you don't get credit for that? How many of you you're like, oh man, like I love Jesus so much. The last thing I want is for anybody to recognize anything that I've done that's good. Right? No. Doesn't it irk you when you don't get the credit that you deserve? This might sound a little more old school, but you don't get the thank you card? Anybody still write thank you cards? Yeah. My wife is like trying to ensure that the next generation is writing thank you cards with our kids. She's just like, did you write a thank you card? Did you write a thank you card? Did you write a thank you card? Lost art, right? But yeah, so if you're the kind of person that expects that the appropriate response to some kind gesture that you have done for another person is that, well, you should receive back a thank you card. And you don't get the thank you card. How does that, where does that leave you feeling? This word, again, it kind of describes almost like the cartoon character of a loud, pompous windbag. I don't recommend any of you watch Caddyshack, but if you've seen it, that's the person, right, that I have in my mind when I think of what Paul is describing here. And while most of us may not be that forward with the way that we are obviously heaping praise on ourselves, what we do need to be careful of is, well, am I just being discreet in the ways that I'm seeking to get noticed? Because if I am, I'm now acting not out of love, I'm acting out of something else. But active love, right? If we're going to actually demonstrate this real virtue of love, this way of love, love prefers to shine the light on someone else. Right? That's what love does. And to be loving is to be constantly asking yourself the question, well, how can I defer the praise that I deserve to get to someone else? The praise that I deserve right now, how can I actually take that light and get it to shine on someone else? Love is not arrogant. This will be the last one that we take up this morning. Love is not arrogant. It's not puffed up, often because of one's position, privilege, or how he or she thinks of himself or herself. We know that, in the church in Corinth, this problem of arrogance was a massive problem for them. Paul says love is not arrogant. I have to ask myself, do I show favoritism toward other people that I think of as kind of belonging to my class or my kind? And here's what love will not do. It will not belittle another person. It will not condescend to another person. It will not disregard another person. It will not despise another person. Instead of belittling, love makes someone who's small feel big. You think about, well, how does love express itself? If it's not arrogant, if it's not seeing myself as bigger than, better than, more important than the other, love makes someone small feel big. Instead of belittling, instead of making somebody feel this big, right? It takes somebody who's this big and makes them feel this big. Where we have a tendency to do the opposite, right? We inflate ourselves by reducing others. But love will not allow for that. Love takes what is small and makes it big. Love makes someone who's dull feel sharp. Right? I said love is not condescending. And so there's a sense in which love will condescend, like that is, love will get to where the other person is, but will not do it in a way that is condescending. Again, God, he sets the pattern for us, right? In our theology of the incarnation of God coming into this world, what are we describing? We're describing how an infinite, eternal, majestic, all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing God condescended himself. Why? Well, so that we could start to understand him, so that we could start to see him. But you know what he didn't do when Jesus came into the world? He didn't come with big muscles. He didn't come with power. He didn't come with might. He didn't come with a horde of angels, just following him wherever he went. He went and he knelt down to the audience of a child. He spoke affectionately to the woman abused. He spoke hopefully to a man that had been cast off and disregarded and considered beyond hope. Love, listen, you're going to find yourself in places from time to time where people, it's very easy for you to just make yourself seem smart and way beyond everybody else. You ever take me on as an apprentice, those of you that can do stuff? It'd be very easy for you to belittle me. I can't do stuff. Right? And so you'd have to condescend. It's like, all right, Josh, yep, that's a hammer. I'm not that bad. Like, I know what a hammer is. Don't try to make everyone else feel like you're the one that knows. Don't be condescending. Finally, love makes someone invisible feel important. I said, what love doesn't do is love doesn't disregard. We have this tendency to just like we have these certain glasses on that allow us to see the people that are most like us or that we most want to like us. And then everybody else is just sort of invisible. And the reality is there's a lot of people in our world. There's a lot of people, perhaps even in our church, who feel invisible, who feel like they're not seen, they're not heard, they're not known. And so what love does is love actively goes out. It takes those glasses off. It opens itself up to all that is going on around. And it sees. And it takes someone who feels invisible and makes them feel important. Makes them feel like they're the most important person in the room. It makes someone who's unwanted feel included. What a beautiful picture of the way love describes how we ought to be with one another. And if you want to hear about the rest of it, you're going to have to come back next week.